church benches and into the trenches. Let's make a righteous ruckus.
Hi, welcome back to this episode, or welcome to this episode of the Righteous Ruckus podcast. I'm your host, Riley Lowe, and I want to get back on the apologetics bandwagon and discuss what's known as the teleological argument. And that's a fancy word just describing what that means is the fine-tuning of the universe. What the fine-tuning of the universe, how that is best described by God, or some other things that it's not best described by, but also that it's described best caused by God. So I want to talk about that. And that word is teleological. It's big, long, big, $500 word that's going to impress people, but all it means is fine tuning. And, whether you look at the universe as a whole, the whole big picture, or if you dig right down into the subatomic particles and the quarks and the neutrinos and all that stuff, what you'll find is that all of that is held together and sustained there's a whole list of these critically important values and numbers that we use mathematically to describe all these different forces that hold all this stuff together, and how precise they are is really amazing. Here's a handful of them here. I've written them down. The Higgs vacuum expectation value, the mass of up-down strange quarks, mass of the electron and neutrinos, electromagnetism, coupling constant, the strong and weak nuclear forces, the cosmological constant, the entropy of the universe, the baryon dark matter mass per photon, the number of the space-time dimensions, and there's more of them, like the force of gravity is a simple one. Everybody thinks about the gravity. But a lot of scientists have realized over the years, the more of these things we find, right? A lot of scientists have realized that the universe is extremely, extremely dialed in to allow us to be here, basically. If any of these values, like that long list, plus the numerous others that there are, if any of those were just changed by just the smallest detail, either everything would just disappear or nothing would have been here to begin with, because everything would have just collapsed upon itself. And all these things, all these different variables have to be so precise that it really, it's amazing. It blows your mind. So I'm going to be kind of heavy on the numbers here. So you'll see me referring to my notes a lot, but let's just look at the force of gravity, right? If the gravitational constant, right, the force of gravity, were changed by 1 part in 10 to the 60th. So that's 1 followed by 60 zeros. 60 zeros. If it was 1 part of that was shifted one way or the other, then none of us would exist. None of what you look around, none of what you see would exist. So to wrap your mind kind of around how amazing that actually is, you can it's hard to imagine, but give it a shot. By 1 in 10 to the 60th is approximately the amount of seconds that have ticked by since time began to exist. That's how many that is. Or probably one of the best explanations or the visualizations that I've heard is Frank Turek described this. He says, if you stretch a tape measure from one end of the known universe all the way to the other end of the known universe, and then along there's an inch mark that is where the force of gravity is currently set at. If you move that inch mark, that force 1 inch one way or 1 inch the other on a scale that's as wide as the whole universe, you move it 1 inch one way, then the universe collapses upon itself. You move it 1 inch the other direction, and it expands too fast, and the gravity's not there, and planets don't exist, stars don't exist, none of this stuff exists, right? So you move that just one. That's how fine-tuned it is. a tape measure that stretches across the entire known universe. You move that 1 inch, one way or the other, nothing's here. We're not here talking. Life doesn't exist, much less planets or stars or galaxies or anything like that. So that's how fine-tuned that is. Now, like I said, that was 1 part in 10 to the 60th. Okay, so let's look at the expansion rate of the universe, which is similar, right? The expansion rate, how fast it's expanding. If that, that's driven by the cosmological constant, right? That's the mathematical part of that. That's what that's called. And if this were changed by 1 part in 10 to the 120th, life would be prohibited. Nothing would be here. There would be no life. 1 part in 10 to the 120th. That's twice as much as the gravity that we just discussed about that blew your mind, right? Or you can look at if the mass and energy of the early universe was moved by 1 part in 10 to 10 to the 123rd, there would be no life anywhere. And that's 1 in 10 to 10 to the 23rd. That's a ridiculous. It's impossible to really even wrap your mind and possibly fathom, because there's nothing to measure that against. You know what I mean? You can't fathom that infinitesimally small, fine-tuned detail there, where the chance of that is so tiny. It blows your mind. So if that were to happen, life, you move that 1 little bit, life doesn't exist. It just doesn't. There's many other numbers that show that the universe that we live in is extremely fine-tuned to be able to support life. There's a lot of these fancy physicists and astrophysicists and different scientists that have. It's funny because they make these discoveries and you're like, ooh, look, this is just so amazing. This is a different thing than we've ever known before. And then they kind of talk about how, boy, it sure seems like this is so amazingly fine-tuned. But, I mean, it can't be God, right? They kind of leave themselves an out. You'll notice that if you really think about some of these quotes, you'll hear that they leave themselves an out. And basically what happens in a lot of these scientific arguments is they rule God out to begin with. So then they never come to the conclusion that God could be a possibility, because most of them are materialists. So they think that matter and space, time, matter, that's all there is, right? That there's no extra level there or thing outside of that, which is really a contradiction, because just the thought process to develop that thought is in itself some sort of abstract thing, right? So even having those thoughts is not material and is expressing ideas that are not material. So it's really self-defeating to even think like that, to rule out something supernatural or outside of something that could be measured, because just the thought process itself can't be measured. Like we've talked about before, the statement, science is the only truth, cannot be scientifically proven. That statement cannot. That thought can't be scientifically proven. So it defeats itself, basically. But it sounds cool. It sounds crazy. And they talk about all that you'll hear them jump to things like, the fine tuning of the universe. It's just amazing to think that, we were all once stardust. And that's like their big hope, right? Is that, the universe, we're part of the universe and the stardust, whatever. If that's what you want to go with, cool. But I think there's a lot better explanation there. So here's a few famous, in the world of academia, people that have, here's some of their quotes that kind of talk about the fine tuning of things. Here's a British astrophysicist, Sir Martin Rees. He's quoted as saying, "Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine tuning." Self-explained, just like we talked about all these different things and discoveries that these people make, and they're like, man, how is this so fine-tuned? And when you take that into consideration with all these other things, and everything is so fine-tuned to the point where if any of these things was off by just a little bit, it would blow the whole thing up. So here's Stephen Hawking, remember the guy in the wheelchair, talked like a robot. He said, the remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. Notice he says things like seem, right? Physicist David Deutsch has said, if anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features the universe has, he is hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. He's talking about unlikely like it's not likely. We just talked about 1 in 10 to 10 to the 23rd is completely unfathomable as far as a possibility, right? So, but he just throws that out there like, it's just unlikely, but here we are. We won the lottery. So, what's the best explanation for such precise fine tuning, right? Is it necessity? That's an argument. It's that these values have to be this way. Is it chance? Did we win the cosmic lottery and we just happened to land in the right spot to where we happen to be here and we're just that lucky? Or could it be design, right? Well, necessity, which is one of the arguments, do these values have to be where they're at? No. They could be anywhere on the scale. And the universe doesn't necessarily have to exist, and the universe doesn't necessarily have to support life. It's not necessary for this to happen without a design element, right? But it's not just necessarily so. That's what some people will argue. Now, what about chance? Are we just, like I said, did we win the cosmic lottery? Are we just looked at how fine-tuned the universe is, so it's not chance, right? Because all of these, there's multiple. I'm thinking tens, possibly hundreds of all these variables that if one of them, you just take one of them and move them a little bit, and the whole thing blows up, right? Now, what you'll hear is some people try to throw out the multiverse and that whole thing, right? Well, it's just a chance. They try to increase chances by saying the multiverse exists, which is basically saying that there's some force out there that is churning out all these alternate universes, and that once we just happen to be in this universe that's this fine-tuned. There's infinite number of other universes, which we've already looked at past episodes of the whole infinite thing and how that falls flat. But when you look at the multiverse, whatever is causing these multiverses, that would have to be extremely fine-tuned itself. So all you're doing is doing what the multiverse theory, what that does anyway, which is just back it up a step and try to get the cause back far enough where you just can't see it anymore. So we don't have to worry about God, because he's so far away now that we don't have to worry about that. And so that's all the multiverse does. And so, like I said, whatever mechanism is causing the multiverses to come into existence or to be and to hold them there would have to be even more fine-tuned than just our universe. So all they're trying to do is distance themselves, whoever's citing that, from the reality, right? So then the other one is design. So necessity and chance, we've just talked about those two. They're not plausible. So let's look at design. Here's a couple more of these famous big-name scientists, right? Astrophysicist Fred Hoyle has said, quote, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. What he's saying is it's almost beyond question that a super intellect, i.e. God, has monkeyed with physics. In other words, fine-tuned physics and designed physics to be just the way they are. Physicist Paul Day, of course, he's avoiding that, right? He's avoiding God by throwing out these other descriptions that basically describe God without saying God. So physicist Paul Davies, he said, there is for me more powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's number to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. Well, notice he throws out nature there. It's just nature is just so fine-tuned. It's overwhelming. Well, because like what in our Constitution, or is it Constitution or preamble, where it says, or Declaration of Independence, it says the laws of nature and nature's God. Well, guess what? This guy's talking about nature's God there. And so they're all talking about how the design, it just seems, we know it's not, but it seems so overwhelmingly precise and designed. Okay? So here's the final quote. And this guy was a long time before any of these astrophysicists and physicists and all these people that I just mentioned, right? This came from King David in Psalm 91 or 19 verses 1 and 2. The heavens declare the